ready. We're going to meet at 10-ish, right here, okay? And we're going to have a celebration. Because your spirit has said you are ready for that. You are ready for what is coming. You need to know that whatever you get is just yours. Because we're all unique, even though we're one. Waves on the ocean kind of thing. Today, Micheal and Jeannie Ryce have traveled here to be with us. Poor thing. That's with a capital B. Okay. And in order for them to be here, there was a connection made 23 years and 8 months between Micheal and myself back in Arkansas. And I came running home to William with the commitment and the information. I said, oh, you got to listen to this guy. And we did. And William and I got married at our anniversary will be 23 years, so we've been together always with Micheal as our guidance. How cool is that? Sometimes. Because once you have tools, then tools are not worth anything unless you use them, right? So sometimes we used them, sometimes not. We looked at it sometimes like having a toothpick trying to take up an asphalt parking lot. To try to go through that process. But it's been delightful to have the tools all these years and to know that we are following our spirit guidance. And when it blows up, so to speak, and I'm stepped out of who I really am, which is love, I have a way back. So today we're going to have a service, church service with Micheal speaking. And then at 1:30, we're going to have potluck. And if you didn't bring food, it's okay. We always plenty of food. And there's a close grocery store we found as well. And please stay. And then there's a workshop that starts, which is the first of a sequence called Why Is This Happening to Me Again? If you had ever thought that if the world would just line up, you'd be really happy. If they could read your mind. 1:30 is no workshop. No. Right after service. Thank you so much. Right after service, and then we'll start the workshop at 1:30. So when we go through the Why Is This Happening to Me Again, it leads into the rest of the week, which I don't have it standing in front of me in this moment, but we have lots of flyers back there that tell us what the next one is. It's
On Creating Consciously.
On Creating Consciously.
Healing Through Relationships.
And we're going to have every night this week.
Communication.
Workshop.
Did you hear what I think I said? Codependence to interdependence. Laws of living. Mind shifters and still point breathing.
Yes. So we have all of this all week. It's all free. And then on Saturday, there's a workshop that is all day, which is kind of like the icing on the cake. When you've gone through all this processing and you're ready and willing to let go of your stuff, there's a still point breathing, Mind Shifters and Still Point Breathing workshop all day on Saturday. We're going to hand out flyers to everyone, so you'll all have the information. But right now, what I want to do is focus on the church service. And I want to introduce, I was going to say that I was going to introduce what he was going to speak about, but I don't know. He told me, but it went like, gone. And I hope that as you sit here this morning, you'll know that you're not going to be the same at the end of this day if you stay even for the church service by itself or through the workshop this afternoon. And I introduce now Micheal Ryce. And Jeannie, would you stand?
Yes.
Oh, this is
Gracias.
good. Oh, this is good.
Perfect height.
I like
this.
There you go. This is the best. I like that. My power person is not usually tall.
Usually I'm told they start out the service with jokes, right? So I came up here and laying on the lectern are some jokes, or what are supposed to be jokes. And the one my eyes fell on was the one that said, "Why do little boys whine?" It says, "Because they're preparing to become men." And when I said back there to Sandra Williams, that doesn't sound very funny with me, to me, Sandra said, I don't get the joke. How uncouth is that? Anyway, it's a delight to be back, delight to be here. And seeing as how I don't know each of you, I just want to kind of run a few ideas by you to see if you're in the right place. And if your answers to these questions aren't, harmonious with what we're going to do, you might not want to bother staying. And if they are, then you're going to get lots out of this. So my first question is, has anybody that's here ever had any conflict in any of your relationships? Anybody? Can you see? Show of hands? Okay. Two-handers, hands and feet back there. Okay, we got the right audience. Has anyone, in order to avoid those conflicts, ever taken the geographic cure? You know where you go to the other side of the country where people will be different?
Gotta go.
And the person that picks you up at the airport finishes the sentence that the person that drop started? How do they know what to say to you? What's the deal here? What's going on? Or you enter into a new relationship and the first thing you do is you read the riot act. This is what I will not put up with. And then you wonder why 6 months later you're living with it. How does this game work? What's the story? Well, probably the greatest atrocity that has been done to us down through the ages, and that we've bought into, is that we've had hidden from us the fact that we are by nature creators. You and I are creative beings, which is an idea that everybody loves when things are going well. When they're not going so well, however, nobody's a creator. In fact, there's one little thing I like to do of speaking in tongues. You ever seen anybody speak in tongues? Well, this is one point where I enjoy speaking in tongues because it just tends to shock everybody. And so if you look at the original speaking in tongues, it was not about somebody who babbled in some foreign tongue and then somebody else interpreted it. The original was that the disciples were so filled with the vibration of the truth that everybody who was listening, no matter which language they spoke, no matter what world they lived in, instead of hearing babble, they heard the core answer inside themselves. So I'm just going to tap in right now, and in this situation where, you're a creator and there's something going on in your life that you, of course, didn't create, what's the name of the person who created? Everybody will hear the right answer in their own head. So let's just take a minute and get quiet. Let me just tune in and we'll just... So, is their name by any chance them? If only, have you got somebody in your life, if they'd just be different, everything would be wonderful in my life. Anybody got one of those? I'd invite you to notice that if you've been through it 87 different times with 42 different people, however, you're the only one that was there every time. And the output of your mind is about you. It's not about anybody else. And until you get that, I guarantee you get to live the title of my book, which is, Why is this happening to me again? It's kind of fun. We'll get people who call our center looking for the book, and you can kind of tell a little bit about what's going on in their lives by the title of the book they ask for. We'll let people say, I understand you have this book. Why are they doing this to me again? Why am I doing this to myself again? And so what we want to do today is to look at how our creatorship works when we don't know it's working. You know, people say, well, this sounds really good, but, it just isn't working in my life. It's working perfectly. Right. All the time, 100% of the time. Your creatorship is always right out there. But when you enter into creatorship and produce a result, and you go back to Yeshua, and they said to him, how do you tell where somebody's really at? He says, look at their fruit. Look at their results. How do you tell where your creatorship is at? Look at the results you're producing. It's always a direct analog. It's always directly in line with your creatorship. But when I think, what awesome sounds, I love it. How cool. When I think or speak as though somebody else is responsible for what I'm feeling, Anybody ever do this? They really made me mad. You really hurt me. That really upset me. If only they'd be different, I wouldn't have to feel that. You really have a problem. You ever say that to somebody? You really have a problem. I have a question for you. If they're the one with the problem, why are you the one with the pain? Something about that doesn't make sense. Obviously, if they were the one with the problem, they'd be the one with the pain. If you're the one with the pain and you think it's their problem, maybe you have a problem and you don't know it. And until you get that one under your belt and stop playing the game of denial, you can go all the way back to the ancient scriptures. And you go back to the ancient Aramaic, and the Aramaic language in which the scriptures were written is a physics language, it's a physiological language, it's a psychological language. It's a genetic language. It's not a religious language. It's just, here's how the game works. You can go all the way back to James 2,000 years ago, and James says, stop your denial. What is denial? Denial is me thinking or speaking as though you're the cause of what's happening in me. Now here's what happens when I live in denial. I think or speak as though you're the cause of what's happening in me. I have to hide the cause of what's happening in me. And that's called dissociation. So I produce a result. I dissociate from the result by saying, you made me, and now I live with the result continuously, again and again and again and again. How many remember the song years ago? Wishing and hoping and praying and planning. Remember that tune? Pretty cool tune. Guess what? If your creatorship isn't going well, all the wishing and hoping and praying and planning and intellectualizing and trying to figure it out and trying to get them to change and all the critical thinking in the world will not change the part of you that is creating the result, because you've dissociated from that part of you. Once you've hidden it, that part of you is impervious to change. Now, in the ancient scriptures, that part was called the heart. Now, up until just a few decades ago, when Freud rediscovered the unconscious, he was given the Nobel Prize for discovering it. He no more discovered it than fly in the air. It was built right into the Aramaic language. It was understood thousands of years ago. But up until he rediscovered it, we couldn't even translate that word heart from the ancient scriptures. When they said, take care of the heart, for out of it are the issues of life, they were saying, you've got to take care of the part in you that you've dissociated from, because that issue that's coming to bite you in the butt is your creative process. And if you don't know that, then you keep struggling and trying to change the outer world. And the more you try to change the outer world, the more work you will do. And the more work you do in trying to change the outer world, the more energy you have to put into hiding the part of you that created it in the first place. And so the faster and more often somebody's going to come and do it to you again. There's a man named Yeshua. His name was not Hail Zeus, Jesus, Jesus. This guy was a Jewish rabbi. Go to the Greco-Roman world in the early years of this time period that's called AD. And let's see how acceptable a Jewish rabbi is in the Greco-Roman world. No. They sat back and went, what can we call this guy that will make him acceptable? Well, the Greco-Roman world had a god called Zeus. Everybody knew Zeus. Everybody honored Zeus. So, well, let's make him a junior Zeus. So we'll make his name, and hail Zeus. If you go to the Vatican, one end of the Vatican, there's a picture, there's a statue of Zeus. The other end of the Vatican, there's a statue, a smaller version, called Zeus, Jesus. His name wasn't Jesus. His name was Yeshua. And if you listen to how that man put the whole game of life together, you'll find that he was the most expert psychologist, psychiatrist, physician, physiologist, geneticist, and healer that the planet's ever seen. Not because of anything miraculous. Those who separate from the understanding want to go, wow, that's pretty miraculous. But he says, hey guys, I'm showing you how. And the things I do, you can do and greater, but you've got to acquaint yourself with the principles. What was the idiom that meant acquaint yourself with the principles in Aramaic? Well, it's interesting how things get misinterpreted. But if you go back to the first century, there was an idiom in use in the Aramaic language. An idiom means something that you can't translate. You've got to know the meaning of it. And so in the first century, to those who wanted to do what he was capable of doing, as he said, we all are, he said, you've got to eat my body and drink my blood. We're going to do communion today. And eat my body and drink my blood has nothing to do with communion. It's an Aramaic idiom. It means that you're going to have to digest, take in, and understand everything that I understand to reproduce the results that I'm telling you you can do. You know, if I were, let's say I make the finest cabinets the world has ever seen. And you came to me and you said, Michael, I want to make cabinets just like you do. If I were Aramaic, I'd say, then you've got to eat my body and drink my blood. We've got an external symbol for an internal meaning. So this is an idiom. You're going to have to take in and understand what I understand. You're going to have to rearrange your whole energy system to match what I can bring through in order for you to bring it through. And so he gave us keys for how to do that. Most of what we hear in the Western world today comes through Greek translations of his words. If Yeshua sat in most churches in the West today, he'd say, that's all Greek to me. What are they talking about? It makes no sense in the context I originally delivered my words. When I first introduced the Aramaic, I like to tell a little story and to illustrate why idioms are so important to understand. So let's imagine that any one of you is the finest translator of, let's say, Russian into English and English into Russian in the world. And we get an email weeks before the workshops. Sandra gets one, and from somebody in Russia that wants to come to the workshops. By the way, I'm just delighted for the people that came from far away, Alaska. It's cool to have everybody here. But imagine that she goes to you and says, you know, I know you speak Russian. Would you mind picking this fellow up? I know you've got an extra room in your house. Would you mind housing him for the week and translating for him because he doesn't speak English? And you're just delighted to have this fellow come and get a chance to practice your Russian. And, you know, the fellow's here for the week and we have fun and we get together once or twice for dinner and have a really enjoyable time. And at the end of the week, as you're getting ready to take him back to the airport, I want him to know how I feel about his visit here. So I ask you if you'll tell him that I think he's really cool. And you turn to him in your best Russian and you tell him that Michael thinks you've got a low body temperature. You translated my words absolutely perfectly, but you didn't say a word about what I meant. Most of what you hear from Greek translations of the Aramaic thinking and speaking of the man named Yeshua are on the level of you've got a low body temperature. There's some kind of a shadow that comes through, but it just doesn't capture the meaning. So one of the things that we're here to do all week, and we're going to do it from a number of different perspectives, is to decode those idioms, to bring an understanding of what he instructed you needed to take in and grok. Everybody familiar with that word grok? Robert Heinlein, Stranger in a Strange Land, wrote a book. And in that book, it's a story about a guy who comes from Mars to Earth. And every time he runs into something he doesn't understand, which there's lots of it, he withdraws his senses, he goes into himself, and he groks what he's experienced. So we're going to unfold what you need to grok to do what he said you could do. That was the same things he was able to do. And he gave us some keys in how to do that. If you don't have, if what you've got is the Greek, then the tendency will be to hope beyond hope that somebody's got some kind of an answer, because that Greek philosophy doesn't work very well. It gives lots of power to the gods, but it leaves people in trauma and suffering and sin and pain and turmoil. Look around at the world today, Yeshua would say that's all Greek to me. They haven't done a thing that I suggested that they do. Oh, they speak about me. In fact, you go back and you'll hear a passage where Yeshua says, many will come to me, yelling my name, chattering away in their mouths, but their hearts are far from me. They're still filled, that dissociated part of them is still filled with hostility and fear. How can you tell if there's hostility or fear in you? Can any event or experience in your life bring up hostility or fear? Well, yes, Michael, but it's all because of what they did. Remember what that's called? That's called denial. When I speak as though something outside of me is the cause of something inside of me, I'm in denial. And I hide my creatorship with that. I dissociate from the cause of my pain or my turmoil or my upset. And now my pain or my turmoil or my upset is absolutely unresolvable. Until I understand how to crack open that dissociated mind. Until I learn to go to my heart and everything that I've been pointing the finger at everybody else for, I remove from my heart. Ooh, how did he say that? You must forgive from your heart the wrongs of your brother. Everything you've been blaming everybody else for, you got to stop pointing out there and you got to go back inside you and you've got to remove that from your own inner structure in order to be free of it. If you can't or you won't do that, then you're going to get to play the same game over and over and over and over again. And basically, anybody who's in that position will fall for anything, hoping somebody's got an answer. They'll fall for all kinds of crazy stuff. And what we're looking to do is to give you the tools to have an experience. And many have tried to describe this experience. We've got a simple way to describe it. How many here have ever held a newborn child? If you go back to the instant where you first held that newborn, do that in your mind's eye. Actually put your hands and hold that newborn and tap into the essence of that newborn. If you were to put the essence of that newborn into one word, what would that word be? Awesome, pure, clean, love, innocence, new. Now, Jeannie and I have asked this question of tens of thousands of people all over the globe. And 100% of the time, everybody's answer is some variation on the theme of love. Why? Because everybody in the world knows what human life is. It is this awesome, active presence of love. And if you don't have one, you're in trouble. If you don't have that experience in your physiology 24/7, 365, then you're not human yet. Just because one has a human form does not make them human. It is the active presence of love powering that human form that makes us human. And so I think we can fairly readily conclude, if we look around the planet, that pretty much the majority of 7.5 billion people are not human. There is not the active presence of love in them. When does the average human lose their human lives? In my experience in doing this work over the last 45 years, the average human is dead by the age of 4. When the stress is up and the chips are down, think about it. When the stress is up and the chips are down, from the age of 4 on, most people have no access to their humanity. They only have access to the generational patterns of hostility, fear, rage, guilt, grief, fight, strife, and abuse. There was a word that described a tool for returning to human life. How do you return to human life? You've got to remove everything that's unlike human life. It's kind of like a virus removal tool. You know, if you've got a hard drive and you replicate that hard drive and there's a virus in the hard drive, is the next hard drive going to be in perfect shape? No, it's going to have the virus of the previous one, and it's going to be vulnerable to more viruses. And if we replicate that one, then it's going to replicate every virus in the second drive, and the third drive is going to replicate every one, and each one will become more vulnerable to those viruses than the generation before it. You might remember a story of the Jews wandering in the desert. Now you notice that they said that these Jews wandered in the desert for 40 years. Now let's think about this, folks. This is a pretty bright group of people. How do you get lost in a 30 square mile area for 40 years? They weren't talking about being lost in a hot, sandy place. The desert is a code word for the dissociated mind, for the unconscious. And you recall, if you read that whole story, there's a conclusion. And in essence, it says, here's how you get out of the desert. What does it say? Anybody know what it says? If you don't know what it says, you're in trouble. Because you're probably lost in the desert because you don't have the virus removal tool. And what's running your life isn't human. Especially when the stress is up and the chips are down. It's time for us to get back to our human lives. And what they said had to happen to get out of the desert, to get out of the dissociated mind, to get out of the unconscious creative process, is they said the old generation has to die off. Now that's Greek. That doesn't mean everybody in old physical bodies has to physically die. The root of the word generation is genari. It means cause. All of the causes that were held in the dissociated mind had to be removed. Now, why did they wander in the desert for 40 years? You ladies know. Moses wouldn't stop and ask for directions, right? Mrs. Moses asked, 2 weeks later, they were in the promised land. What has to happen? What is the promised land? Hold a newborn child. That's the promised land. You want to live there? Then here's what you got to do. You got to go in and clean out your desert. You've got to remove every cause, every generation of rage, of guilt, of grief, of fear, of hatred, of vengeance, of pain, of drama and trauma, and stop pretending that somebody else is going to do it for you, because somebody else isn't going to do it for you. You might remember Yeshua said to those who were relying on him, and you look at how many people are standing around going, yeah, he's going to take care of it for us, boy. We got it handled. What did he say to them? He said, I'm going to go because you guys are relying too much on me. I'm leaving. So you can do your work. You can connect to that which I'm working to connect you to. And as you connect to that, then you realize there's a way to get out of the desert. It's not a religious journey. It's just a journey that each of us who have touched non-human life have to make to get to live as humans. And once you recognize that, then you realize that there's work to be done. And you have to do your work. And the work, once again, is the work of forgiveness. Now, what did the Greeks tell us? The Greeks told us to live in denial. They made me sad, they made me afraid, they hurt me, but I'm going to let them off the hook. I'm going to forgive them. So when somebody says they made me, what's the state they're living in? It's a state of denial. Now, I've actually thought about petitioning Congress and inviting them to create a 51st state, because most everybody lives there, the state of denial. And then as a result of that denial, I've thought about petitioning Congress to form a 52nd state. And that would be the state that anybody who lives in denial lives in, and that's confusion. And where are most people living? Denial and confusion, because they are not acquainted with the content of their own unconscious minds. They are not acquainted with what's in their own desert and what runs them when the stress is up and the chips are down. And that's where the rubber hits the road. You know, I'm going to assume that, those who've been to this church before have heard from this pulpit that it's about love, and you got it. You went, man, I got it. It's about love. Yes. And you maybe went home to that person that had previously shown you the part of your minds that you dissociated from. And you said, guess what I got this morning? I got that it's about love, and so from now on and forevermore, I am going to live lovingly with you. And then that's what you did, right? Until the next time they gave you the look. And what happened to your resolve to function lovingly? You gave it over to the content of your desert and you blamed them. And somebody told you just forgive them. Anybody who tells you to forgive them is telling you a lie. Never forgive anybody for anything. Oh, that's right, I have to forgive myself. Never forgive yourself for anything. The act of letting another or yourself off the hook for what they or you have done is called pardoning. You go to Vladimir Lenin, in his writing, he says, the way you destroy a culture is to change the meaning of its words. When they changed forgiveness to pardoning, forgiveness disappeared. See, when you change the meaning of a word, whatever the original meaning represented is disappeared. So almost 2,000 years ago, forgiveness was disappeared. And it became pardoning. I let you off the hook, I let you off the hook, I let you off the hook. Why are they doing this to me again? I let them off the hook. I let myself off the hook. And there's no forgiveness, which means we accumulate from generation to generation to generation to generation these viruses of hostility or fear that we dissociate from and blame everybody else for and want to forgive them. Letting another off the hook is not forgiveness. Substitute the word remove every time you think of forgive, and you'll be on track. So if you and I interact and up comes my rage, I want to remove my rage. I do not apply forgiveness to you. To remove you would be murder. Not very acceptable. I do not apply pardoning to myself. To remove myself is suicide. Not very acceptable. If I choose to pardon you or pardon myself, that's great. That's a nice thing. It actually has a benefit. And that is that when you pardon another, you can disconnect your pain and your turmoil from your mind's image of them, and you can have a cleaner relationship with them. But it doesn't clean anything out of your unconscious, out of your dissociated mind. So whenever I want to forgive, I want to think removal. Here I am in my rage. I need to remove my rage. It takes away my human life. Here I am in my sadness. I want to remove my sadness. It takes away my human life. Here I am in my fear. I want to apply forgiveness to my fear to remove my fear. Now I can live as a human. I can allow that active presence of love that I am to be in full awareness instead of the awareness being lost in this hostility and fear game that we've all been taught to play. You know, in the ancient scriptures, they said there'd come a time when the whole world would be fooled. The people think that the scriptures are about religion. The whole world has been fooled. It's not. It's the most practical, here's the how-to of cleaning up your life and living as a human being. That's all there is to it. But those who've had the tools removed hope beyond hope that some dogma or some doctrine will save them. And there is no doctrine or dogma that will save you. There is no belief that will save you. There is no belief that will save you. Your work will remove from you that which destroys your human life, or that is your awareness of it, because in truth, the truth of who you are, the awesome active presence of love, has never been touched by anything that's happened in the world. You may have fear and pain and sadness and grief in here, but that's all what's in here. It can't, it's like kind of like on an energetic level, you can't get an AM signal into an FM radio. The signal passes through, but there's nowhere for it to land. You can't listen to the AM radio through the FM. What happens on this level of what we call physical, this energy level, can't touch the truth of who you are. And when you throw out, forgive what's not you, hostility and fear, you show up again, and it's like the rest of it's just kind of like this faded memory. Oh yeah, I remember when that happened. It's like, so what? The thing that's the most horrible, terrible trauma, when I'm in non-being, comes up when I stand as a human being, and I go, oh, I remember when that was a horrible, terrible trauma. Wow, that was a dandy. Whew, thank God I'm finished with that one. But you don't get finished with it unless you've got the how-to remove it. And so everything we're going to do this week is going to be a different set of tools, a different how-to confront the parts of the mind that never belong. Let's listen to one way that Yeshua summed up what I've said so far. And it happens in Luke 10:25, and here's what it says. The scribe stood up to test him, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Now you notice this guy isn't dealing with his life. He's off in space somewhere talking about eternal life. When you hear the completion of this passage, what you'll recognize is that Yeshua didn't answer his question. Yeshua knew the answer. He could mimic it with his mouth, but he didn't have it in his heart. And then, when he turns the question back to the man, this guy's a scribe. He knows how to parrot the words. When he turns it back to him, he then tells him what question his answer answers. So the scribe says, "What do I do to inherit eternal life?" Yeshua says to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" The scribe answered, saying, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Now that's the Greek translation. Let's listen to the Aramaic translation. You must function as love when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor, in order to maintain your human life. So that's the answer that's given. And then Yeshua tells him What question, his answer answers. He says, you spoke the truth. Do this, and you shall live. Does that mean if you're not functioning as love, that you're not alive? I'd offer that's exactly what it means. If you are not functioning as the active presence of love, you are not a live human being. Do this. Now, you'll notice that there are those who come along with easy dogmas and doctrines and say, oh, just believe, or just kind of wash in that red blood stuff, and then everything will be okay. Not what Yeshua says. He's real clear right here. He says, here's how you live. You do this. You function as the active presence of love. And when you do, then you will have a true human life. Is everybody breathing? Yeah. And we've all got work to do. We've all got work to do. I've been doing this for 45 years. I'm nowhere near finished. I carry on with this work every day in my own life, in my own process. And I'd offer the reason why is because when you recognize what you're really looking at doing, you're looking at cleaning up 1,000 generations of who knows what has happened in our bloodline. You know, when they said the sins of the fathers will be passed unto 3 and 4 generations. I can remember being a kid and going, well, why am I going to get punished for what my father did and his father and his father? That's ridiculous. That's not what it said in Aramaic. The word sin is an archery term. When you fired at the target and you missed the bullseye, the scorekeeper yelled sin. You're off the mark. That's all the word means. If I take an energy that's off the mark into my structure, then I have sin. What energies do not belong in a form that everybody agrees at the start was human, was love? Do you suppose that hate and fear and anger and guilt and grief and rage and pain maybe don't belong in this system? They are sin. They are off the mark. They're energetic patterns that don't belong. When they said the sins of the fathers will be passed, yea, into 3 and 4 generations, they were not threatening us with what the parents had done. They were just telling us how physiology works. Your body-mind unit, or what we call that, we'll clarify that in the workshop this afternoon a little more, your energy system is a device that stores every frequency that comes to it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it stores those frequencies holographically in every cell of your structure, including the sperm and the egg. So were you to conceive a child tomorrow, that child would have in its structure every thought you've ever thought, every feeling you've ever felt, every reality you've ever engaged in. And if you don't have the virus removal tool, you'll pass it on to the next generation. How many here have children? How many have noticed that having children is like having your unconscious mind hang out in true living color and Dolby sound? Everything you've never dealt with, they do. Why? Because that's the generational pattern passed on. And life is determined to heal you. You'll notice how determined it is. If you go into some form of hostility or fear at your children for doing the things you're in denial of and you don't want to deal with, you'll blame your children. If you do that throughout your lifetime, then you will, because of those sin energies, those energies off the mark, start to dissolve and disintegrate. And as you go into disintegration and the mind in denial disintegrates, you will then bring it up for your kids as they try to care for you. Life is going to heal you. If we had never put an energy into this structure that didn't belong, the purpose of life would be aliveness, joy, and creativity. That's all. But the minute we defile our temples, the purpose of life changes. And at that moment, the purpose of life is to kick us right square in the limitation. To show us exactly what we're holding on to that needs to be forgiven. And you'll notice that life is infallible at it. Now you say, well, when that happens, it makes me feel. When I say, when that happens, it makes me feel, what am I living in? Denial. So I try to put the cause outside myself, and I never stop and go, when that happened, it brought up feelings like this. And what I need to do is forgive the root of these feelings. I need to get to what's in my own dissociated mind and clean it out. That's called virus removal. Anybody know anybody that's got the virus removal tool hanging around in their family system? It's been unheard of in our culture for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. It's been disappeared. It's been turned into, I let you off the hook for what I'm feeling. Have I done anything to change what I'm feeling if I let you off the hook? Nothing whatsoever. My feelings are a result of my sin. If my feelings are turmoil or pain, putting energies in that are off the mark create pain. And pain has a purpose. And pain's purpose is to make your ears grow. To get you to go, here I am doing this again. I think it's time for me to go in and remove the root of my pain. So Yeshua gave us several keys that are what I consider to be the 5 core principles that we need to understand from his teaching. The first one that I believe is key and core, and if you go back, you listen to the Greek scriptures, see if you can figure this one out, see if it makes any sense in Greek. The eye is the lamp of the soul. If the light for you is darkness, how deep will your darkness become? Anybody ever look at that passage and go, what the heck does it? The eye is the lamp? I don't see any light coming out of it. And if the light is darkness, how can light be darkness? That just doesn't make any sense. Here's what it says in Aramaic. Perception, the output of your mind, is meant to be a guide for your earthly life. If your lights are out, you're in trouble. If darkness is the guide you follow. So if the light for you is darkness, if you hide something from yourself, if you go into denial and dissociation, sooner or later that hidden part of your mind is going to come up and try to guide you through something. And if that darkness, and in Aramaic, darkness is hostility or fear, if that hostility or fear is the light you follow, the guide you follow, then how deep will your darkness become? What kind of crazy things will you do to destroy yourself? Anybody here ever destroy a relationship, a business? Well, I guarantee you weren't in a human state when you did that. What state were you in? Where did your words come from? They came from a mind of hostility or fear. If hostility or fear is the light, the perception that you have, shut your mouth. Don't say a word. Don't do a thing until you get your lights back on. Until you are restored to the active presence of love, keep your mouth shut. Perception is the guide for your journey through this life. If perception is filled with darkness, stop. This is one of the key principles to understand of what Yeshua taught. Get your lights back on. Get restored to love your human life before you say a word, before you take an action. First key. The eye is the lamp of the soul. Perception is the guide for your journey through this life. Anybody here ever been to Mammoth Cave in Kentucky? Pretty awesome, isn't it? I mean, talk about Mammoth. So to understand this one of perception, imagine that we've taken a bag with $1 million, a clear plastic bag with $1 million worth of diamonds, and set it on the wall of the cave. And we're going to send you into the cave, and if you can get out of the cave alive with the diamonds, they're yours. And we're going to hand you a pen light. Now there's a reason, if you haven't been there, they call Mammoth Cave Mammoth Cave. It's mammoth. So if I go into Mammoth Cave with a pen light, I get to see one tiny, little part of the cave at a time. Now imagine I stand there for hours and I shine the light, and finally I see the diamonds sparkling in the light. And of course, I don't want to lose sight of them, so I keep the pen light focused on the diamonds, and I go charging off for them, and I don't use the light to show me the 30-foot pit that's in front of me. I'm not getting out of the cave alive with the diamonds. Cancel the thought. Perception is meant to be a light that you shine in the appropriate places to keep your intelligence active. Anybody here ever done something they regret? If you would, I'll just invite you for a moment to tap into one time when you did something that you said something, you did something, and today you regret it. Go back to the moment when you did that. What were you feeling that motivated you to do that which you now regret having done? Put a word to it and share your word with us.
Jealousy.
Jealousy.
Distrust.
Distrust.
Anger.
Anger. Fear. Now, I've never had anybody who said, I was in this awesome connected space of pure love. Notice that what you now regret, you did when your lights were out. If hostility or fear fills your perception, then your lights are out. You're going to do something you regret. This is a really important principle to understand. Again, the way the Greeks translated it, the eye is the lamp of the soul. If the light for you is darkness, how deep will your darkness become? Stop doing any behavior when darkness is in your mind. It's pretty simple. Get restored. The next key that he gave us is the most important thing to do. So, perception being the guide is the most important thing to know. What's the most important thing to do? Well, they said to Yeshua, what's the prime directive? What's first in the game? Anybody remember what he said? He said, you must have the condition of love in your mind when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor, in order to maintain self. In order to maintain your human life, you've got to keep, it's actually the word that was used in Aramaic. The Greeks translated it as love. It doesn't say love in Aramaic. It says rachma. Rachma is a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain. That is a gateway for human life to enter. If you lose that condition in your mind, that's the first and most important thing. That's why he called it the first law. Now, you can't milk that out of the Greek in a million years of study of Greek philosophy pretending to be Aramaic theology. What he said is you've got to understand there's a filter in the frontal lobes of your brain that supports you maintaining the condition of love and maintaining your human life. Keep that active. Second key. Know that the condition of love is prime importance. It's the prime directive. The first thing to do is keep that condition active. The third key, the most important tool. If you lose the active presence of love, what's the most important tool? You've got to know how to remove the virus. The tool for removing the virus is called forgiveness. Any virus that you hold within you, and I'll define virus in this human form as anything unlike love, anything that is hostility or fear, you'll notice you pass to the generations. You notice your kids have got it. Forgiveness is how to remove the generational patterns. When I say there's work to be done, when I say I've been doing this for 45 years and I'm not done yet, people say, well, you must be a slow learner, buddy, if you're not finished yet. Hey, if you're not finished in 45 years, I'm not going to bother. What's the task at hand? All we're asking you to do is to open the veil of your temple. When they said the veil of the temple must be rent in twain, we're not talking about a purple curtain in a church. The barrier between the subconscious and the unconscious must be opened. And you must forgive whatever's in there from the generations. You must remove that which results in an experiment or an experience happens and your mind shoots up some form of hostility or fear. You've got to remove the viruses. If not, you'll pass it to your generations. When you choose to remove the viruses, you open the energy window for those who have gone before you to remove that from themselves and those who come after you, your children and their children and their children, to be freed from it. It's a really good reason to do the work. So the most important tool is the tool of forgiveness, the virus removal tool. Again, the world will try to trick you telling you how you should forgive them or you should forgive yourself. Forget it. If you're going to pardon somebody, you're going to pardon yourself, call it what it is, it's pardoning, and then go about doing the removal process, the forgiveness. Third key, most important tool. Fourth key is the most important, to understand what the most important block is. What is the most important block to doing this process? The most important block is Satan. You mean that dude with the red suit, the tail, and the pitchfork? No, not what Yeshua meant, not what the Aramaic means. That's Greek mythology. Hey, keep those people terrorized and keep them thinking the problem's out there somewhere. Now you've got them in denial, they're powerless for life. They make great slaves. In Aramaic, the word Satan means the resistor, one who misleads. Now you'll notice the average person, when they're in the middle of their muddle and their hostility and fear, and you say to them, you know, I've noticed you've been through this many, many times. Maybe this is about you. They go into, no, it's not about me. You should have seen what they did. And you've got a whole story about them, right? The resistor, now I am misled. I think that what's going on inside of me is caused by somebody outside of me, and I am trapped in Satan. Most of the world is trapped in Satan. Where is Satan? Well, you'll remember there was a number that went along with that beast. And the number was what? 666. If we did a behavior up here in front of the room, let's say we had somebody come up and do a behavior that everybody agreed was terrible, disgusting, awful, you know. If we went around the room and surveyed everybody, number 5, the 5th key, is the most important request to make. In the ancient Aramaic, you know, there's some interesting Harvard research that says that in a time frame where 10,000 brain cells firing, there are 10,000 measurable units of electrical activity happening in your brain. The max amount of information you can be aware of in that time frame, which is about a 25th of a second, is 9 bits. You and I have, for the sake of our example, a 9-bit mind. Now think about a 9-bit processor in a computer. You know, remember when you had an old 64K? You put this floppy disk in and it held 64K of information, and now you have 15 gigs of RAM in your computer, and you've got a 5 terabyte hard drive. This afternoon we're going to call on some work of the man who invented the magnetic coating that allows your hard drive to operate. He gives us some important keys in this process. So the key here is to recognize that the generational patterns are beyond your capacity to process. And in this work we define processing as the ability to keep love conscious, active, and present when something less than love comes up. You can't process it. I don't care. In a million years, you won't process your generational patterns. But what Yeshua taught 2,000 years ago was that there was an elemental force in us that if we invited her, and it is feminine in Aramaic, if we invited her into activity, she would undo the effects of our errors and teach us the truth. Pretty cool. You and I had implanted in us an elemental force that we can deny. Now you notice the fear-based Greek translations say the denial of that force, and the Greeks translate it as the Holy Spirit. There's nothing there about a Holy Spirit or a disembodied spirit being. There is a feminine elemental force in us that when we invite it into activity has the processing power to move right down to your genetic toes, whatever the root of the thing is. And to deny her is to be stuck in unforgiveness, is what that Greek passage says. It doesn't say the denial is the unforgivable sin. It says you're stuck in unforgiveness because you don't have the processing power. So the most important request to make, the fifth key in the teachings of the Aramaic Yeshua, is there is a power in you that knows how to go through all your generations around any given issue that you're working with, and to the limit of your willingness, it will process that out of you. It will forgive that in you. It will remove that from your carbon-based memory, and you will be freed of it. And you will only know she exists by inviting her into activity, like all the elemental forces. You know, when Yeshua was explaining this to one of the elders of the temple, he says, you know, the elder says, what are you talking about? He says, you, one of the elders, you don't know about this? And so Yeshua uses the example of an elemental force they do understand. He says, the wind. You know the wind came from somewhere. You know by its effects that it's been here, though you don't know directly what it is, and now it's gone. So it is with this elemental force. If you invite her into activity, you will notice changes happen in your mind and in your bloodline that you couldn't make with your intellect, with your 9-bit mind. Most important request. Invite that super processor into activity, and she will change everything in your life. They're the 5 keys that in many years of study I've come up with. For those who might not know it, I'm the director of a foundation that's translating a copy of the oldest known New Testament in its original Aramaic language into English. It's called the Kibboris manuscript. The keys that are in there are just beyond comprehension, especially when you think about what we've been given through the Greek teachings. So as you breathe, we invite you to just get quiet for a moment. And know that inside of you there is this elemental force. The world will try to teach you you're powerless because they want you to be a slave. Don't give people the tools and they'll end up in slavery. Teach them to watch somebody else who did the process, and they will never do the process. Teach them someone else is going to do it for them. Remember, Yeshua says, you guys are so focused on me, I'm going to leave. You got to do it. I'm just going to invite you to just breathe, tap into the active presence of love. And Richard Bach, in his book Illusions, writes an awesome story about this process. I would just like to read it to you as you quietly think on these things. Once there lived a village of creatures along the bottom of a great crystal river. The current of the river swept silently over them all, young and old, rich and poor, good and evil, the current going its own way, knowing its own crystal self. Each creature, in its own manner, clung tightly to the twigs and rocks of the river bottom, for clinging was their way of life, and resisting the current what each had learned from birth. But one creature said at last, I'm tired of clinging. Though I cannot see it with my eyes, I trust this current knows where it's going. I shall let go and let it take me where it will. Clinging, I shall die of boredom. The other creatures laughed and said, Fool, let go, and that current you worship will throw you, tumbled and smashed against the rocks, and you will die quicker than boredom. But the one heeded them not, and taking a breath did let go, and at once was tumbled and smashed against the rocks. Yet in time as the creature refused to cling again, the current lifted him free from the bottom, and he was bruised and hurt no more. And the creatures downstream, to whom he was a stranger, cried, See a miracle, a creature like ourselves, and yet he flies. See the Messiah come to save us all. The one carried in the current said, I am no more Messiah than you. The river delights to lift us free if we only dare let go. Our true work is this voyage, this adventure. But they cried all the more, Savior, all the while clinging to the rocks, and when they looked again, he was gone. and they were left, making legends of a Savior. One came 2,000 years ago who knew exactly how to bring healing to your life. He showed us. I am the way, the truth, and the life is an Aramaic idiom that says, my teaching and I are one. I have taught you how to do it. Now I leave so that you can do your work. I will always be there as support, but you've got to do your work. And I'm delighted to be here to support you in that this week. Thank you. Namaste. So Sandra.
Yes.
Are you taking over now?
Oh,
Are we doing communion?
we can do communion. Daryl is going to assist me.
I think that would be cool. I'll assist you too.
I would love
Awesome.
Okay.
Come
You
on in.
start putting like just part past as far as they will go. We have some flyers for those of you that don't have one of the topics of all of the workshops for this today and then this next week. And we can make more in the back, but I'll start passing them out.
All right.
Can I help? Can you help me? Here we go.
Got it?
Got it? Here we go. You ready? Okay. Communion. As Michael talked about ingesting it, we talk about communing with one another with love that can only come from within us. So that is the symbol of taking the bread. We have unleavened bread. We have rice cakes for those who are gluten intolerant. And we have animal crackers for those who would like to follow the Native American way. And so let's just pause for a moment and be grateful and thankful for the purity of love and the clarity of its guidance. And we commune with that. Take it within us. Thank you. So be it, and so it is. Thank you.
And as you take this in and join with each other, Yeshua said, do this in remembrance of me. And that was to break bread, to share that essence of life. And it's interesting, in the Greek translations we hear something about something that's kind of presented as some place in an afterlife, some place that's unachievable today, something called the kingdom of God. But if you go to the Aramaic, what that translates properly is the community of love. That as each of us comes together out of this active space of love, we create the community of love, literally in Aramaic, the kingdom of God. It's here on earth. Yeshua said, if somebody tells you it's over there or over there, don't believe them. It's here, it's now, it's within you. And these taking of the elements are symbolic of those elemental exchanges that happen between us as we tap into and together create the community of love.
Would you like to offer up something for the symbol of...
And taking of the wine is symbolic of, a seed was planted and became something that looks quite different. As the seed of truth is planted in each of us, we become something quite different than the appearance that came forth from us before the seed was planted. And if this seed has been planted in fertile ground and, with all the farming land around here, you know what has to be done to make that seed grow. This seed of truth has to be nurtured in exactly the same way. It has to be watered daily. It has to receive light. It has to receive sunshine. And so let this finished product of the seed that was planted that produced this grape juice be symbolic of the seed that is planted in each of us as we create a community that works together on another level than what the world does.
Carpet cleaners are coming Thursday. There's someone out here that is just oozing gratitude. We have a tradition here for offering, for giving from the abundance that we are given, whatever that might be. And so we usually just look around and used to, but all the heads went down. Don't choose me, don't choose me. But as time has gone on, the heads raise, and they know that it's theirs. It's their time to give. Marcia, would you like to do the offering this morning?
Thank you. What an honor. This is my first time doing this. Wow, we have a crowd. Gratitude. I think it's the best thing for me. My life has changed so much since I have started working on what I call is the metaphysical world, and I'm growing and learning other words to use, and I am so grateful. I've only lived here about, well, less than a year and a half, or around a year and a half now, and I have been so blessed to have met so many of you and learned so much from you that it's just, I can't even find words. I also can see my own changes, and it's because of so many of you that I can see that in this fellowship. This is kind of my own little gold mine in a way. So in order to keep this place going and to get wonderful talks like this, we need to give. And bless you all. Thank you.